of romantic faith that art could keep the love of homeland alive. That was certainly what a young Scottish poet, Robert Burns, felt acutely. Growing up in the 1770s in southwest Scotland, Burns knew the Union couldn't be undone. But what he could do was to create authentically Scottish poetry and a songbook that could hold its own against the oncoming tide of English culture. And in his brilliant hands, it worked like a dream.
My love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. My heart is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. This fair heart, though, my body lied so deep in love.
Scottish singer-songwriter Eddie Reader made a name in the 80s with her band Fairground Attraction. And it was Burns' irresistible magnetism, much of which he put on show in this pub in the village of Mauchline, that she credits for pulling her back to the music and poetry of her own country.
My only love, fare thee well, and I will come again, my dear, though it were 10,000 years. Everyone's a bit obsessed with Burns. They're all a bit in love with him, and they all have a bit of him in them. I had a hit with Perfect when I was 28, and I went to France and then went to London, and I thought I'd use traditional Scottish music as a kind of a little bridge for me to get home. I started collecting the ones I remembered, and then it just happened to be that they were all Robert Burns songs I didn't realise.
And when you said, you know, it was a bridge of taking you home, home is the language, really, as well.
He spoke in his own language, and he didn't even actually know that he was a good poet or a bad poet. He just did it.
He wanted to give what he heard in the pub and what he heard in the street and what he heard in Scotland.
Yeah.
You know, mainly in the Scottish dialect.
But people are material, and, you know, Bob Dylan uses people as material, so did Johnny Rotten. It's just kind of us. We are material. Right. The people that have used his words, like, you would meet them driving taxis, or just a guy, a plumber that I met, came up to me and he went, I love your Burns stuff. He says, my favourite one is, you see yon Burkie, cod a lord, with struts and preens and all that. He's but a coof for all that, for all that, for all that. And the way he said it to me, I just got it.
Burns knew how the people talked and sang because he was one of them. Born into a tenant farming family in Ayrshire, after his father's death in 1784, Robert, then in his early 20s, took on this farm called Moskiel along with his brothers. Struggling to make a living, it was here in between mucking out the cows and threshing the wheat that Robert first turned his hand to writing a completely new kind of poetry, one rooted in the experiences of ordinary Scottish life. Well, you think of every kind of poet in the Romantic movement, you know, who hymns the beauties of nature, but no one who actually has to do the bloody hard lifting. And he has to do his share of ploughing and threshing and all the really hard stuff that goes with a farm like this. He describes this farm as sodden and difficult. And you think about the day of Robert Burns in a place like this, and everybody knows that when Robert is doing this very hard work, he's dreaming poetry, at least he must do at the end of the day in the barn. And what he does, and only he does, can't think of anyone in Britain really feeds his daily grind, his daily experience, both of pain and joy, into the words on the page, like Burns. To start with, he wrote his poems to show off in the village and down the pub, but soon they turned into something much bigger. Taking what seemed to be the simplest subjects, mice, haggis, cottage suppers, their power owed everything to being written not in the conventions of English poetry, but in a Scottish dialect, in the rhythms and speech of ordinary working people. In one poem, Burns turned his own experience of disturbing a mouse's nest with his plough into a hymn of kinship between a lowly field mouse and the hard-pressed tenant farmer tilling Scotland's soil.
Wee sleeked, cowering, timorous beastie, oh, the panics in thy breastie. Thou needna start a law sae hasty with bickering brattle. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union and justifies that ill opinion which makes thee startle at me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal. But Mousie, thou art no thy lane, and proving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes o' mice and men gang after clay, and lays us naught but grief and pain for promised joy.
But once playful and profound, no one had heard anything like these poems before. When they were published in 1786, everyone, townsmen and country folk alike, loved what he'd done. Overnight, the ploughman poet became a star, Scotland's national bard. In 1787, followed by adoring fans, Burns toured his country on a series of celebrity book tours. But he also had an added purpose: to rescue and collect traditional Scottish songs and ballads for an anthology called The Scots Musical Museum. He wanted, he said, to make a pilgrimage through Caledonia, to visit its castles and battlefields, what he called the abodes of its heroes. Riding into the northeast heartland of his own family's Jacobite history, Burns's journey turned into a kind of communion with his country's heroic and tragic past. But Scotland's historic monuments weren't just an outdoor museum. They also spoke to its present troubles in revolutionary times. In 1792, fired up by the French Revolution, riots and protests broke out on the King's birthday in Edinburgh, continued in towns and villages across Scotland, demanding liberty and political reform. Terrified that the fires of Republican revolution had been lit in Scotland, in 1793, the British government arrested and tried a group of Scottish radicals, later sentencing 2 of them to death, and the rest with transportation to Australia. Burns's politics had always been complicated, but he was an instinctive Republican, and these events sharpened his feelings about the Union, leading him to write his most politically charged song. Well, this is something that's incredibly precious. The manuscript of one of Burns's most famous, if not the most famous poems, Scots Wha Hae, is known all over Scotland, and it's a document of uncompromising political radicalism. And this was written at a moment of intense political crisis, not just for Scotland, but for the whole of the British state. And ostensibly, it's the address that Robert the Bruce gave to his troops before Bannockburn. But actually, it's about a lot more. setting it to the marching tune played by Scottish troops during what was Scotland's most famous victory against the English in 1314. Burns turned Robert the Bruce's words into an enduring anthem of Scottish defiance.
And so it begins as a romantic historical piece. Now's the day and now's the hour. See the front of battle lower. See approach proud Edward's power. Chains and slavery and so on. But the end builds into something which is as close as Burns gets to spitting in the eye of the English state. He says explicitly that this is not just about history, it's about Scottish liberty. The last stanza could have come out of the mouth of any French revolutionary. It's the kind of Scottish Marseillaise. Lay the proud usurpers low, tyrants fall and every foe. Liberties in every blow, let us do or die. This is the anthem of Scottish freedom.
Scots wha hae wi Wallace bled, Scots one Bruce is often led. Welcome to your gory bed, or to victory. Now's the day and now's the hour, see the frontal battle loud, see approach proud Edward's power, chains and slavery. Wha will be a traitor knave, wha can fell a coward's grave.
The song has long become Scotland's unofficial national anthem.
Be a slave, let him turn and flee.
Burns was convinced that music could trigger a great swell of fellow feeling, even if you were separated by wealth, rank, or education.
Freemen stand and freemen fall, let him follow me.
Everyone could sing their way to national togetherness.
Woes and pains by your sons in servile chains.
But above all, it's his uncanny ability to give voice to the great chorus of the Scottish people that explains why he still stirs such passion.
Lay the